And the people are represented by Mr. Brockler, Ms. Pearson, Mr. Orman, Mr. Edson, and Ms. Tish McGuire. We are outside the presence of the jury. Yesterday, as toward the end of the day, one of the jurors made a comment to one of my bailiffs before the bailiff could stop him. He said something to the effect of, we didn't see the emails, or the emails were not shown, or something like that. And I think for the most part, we've been publishing the exhibits that have been admitted. So what I propose is that I tell them that not all exhibits that are admitted may be published, but they'll have an opportunity to review them during deliberations. Is there any objection to proceeding in that fashion from the people?
No, Your Honor. Having been admitted, I contemplated publishing them. They did not seem to be suitable for publication given the volume through the normal LCD projector method. If the court is amenable, point that makes more sense than copies and ask the court publish them or at least separate.
Okay, you're not asking to publish them right now?
No, sir.
Okay. Any objection by the defense, Ms. Brady?
No, Your Honor, we would object to publishing them later, though. So I think they either need to be published when they're admitted or left for the jury to look at when they get back to the deliberation.
It depends. I mean, if there's another witness who might talk about them or something, it might make sense to publish them. When are you intending to publish them? Mr. Brockler, do you know yet?
I don't know yet, Judge. We have several other witnesses testify, lay the foundation for emails to see if the court, and we also have someone from C provide about the email accounts themselves.
All right. If you want to ask to publish exhibits at any point, make the request, and then I'll see if there are any objections at that time. Okay? All right, but for now, all I'm deciding is that I will give the jury the instruction that I just indicated that I would. Are the parties ready for the jury?
Here, Your Honor.
The defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Actually, Your Honor, I have a matter that I'd like to take up outside the presence of the jury regarding a witness today.
Yes.
I also have a brief issue I'd like to mention to the court at the bench if I could.
Okay, which one do you want to do first?
I'd like to approach the bench first.
Okay.
If you have varicose veins,
Okay, Ms. Higgs?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Thank you. The people have indicated to me that they're intending to introduce People's Exhibit 1231. This is a PowerPoint presentation, and they intend to introduce it through the next witness, Dr. Klug. And I want to make a record as to my objections with regard to the entire PowerPoint. I would cite the court to the Colorado Constitution, Article 2, Sections 20 and 25, as well as the United States Constitution, Amendments 5, 8, and 14, as well as the Colorado Rules of Evidence 401 and 403, and hearsay. I would object that it is not relevant. I believe it will be cumulative to the testimony. I also object that it is hearsay and would violate confrontation. There are statements in here and slides taken from other websites, and I believe it's being offered for the truth of the matter. I think under 403, in addition, it will be somewhat confusing to the jury, as well as misleading, because it's really difficult to understand and sort of requires an expert opinion to understand what the concepts are in here, and this witness has not been endorsed as an expert. I would also make specific objections to slides 3, 4, 8, 10, 18, and 23. I have put little Post-its on those slides because the pages aren't numbered, and include the objections that I made at the bench with regards specifically to those slides.
Right, Mr. Brockler, response?
Your Honor, this is going to be offered as a PowerPoint presentation generated by the defendant at the close of his first rotation with Dr. Klug. It represents the areas that he investigated as well as his what he was able to produce. It is reflective of his intellect at the time, his ability to follow directions, his ability to communicate and put together these written materials that were later presented. There is no unfair prejudice based on some of the arguments that we made at the bench, Your Honor. And even if there were, it certainly doesn't outweigh the probative value. His performance and his ability to perform throughout the year leading up to this massacre have been an issue for both sides in this case, and this helps provide some evidence of that.
Can I see the slides that were specified, 3, 4, 8, 10, 18, and 23? Yes.
And if I could just bond.
Well, no, hold on. I just need to look at this. Do these have numbers, or do you just...
Your Honor, they're not page numbers on there, and that's why I put the Post-it notes. I counted them, and I think I was accurate in stating the pages.
I got you, thank you. Okay. Anything else quickly, please?
Yes, Your Honor, I would just reiterate what Ms. Brady indicated yesterday with regard to the emails, that the prosecution's argument with regard to relevance is fundamentally premised on a misunderstanding of mental illness and this idea that somebody cannot be smart and yet mentally ill. And I don't think that that is accurate, and therefore I think that diminishes any argument that this is relevant on that basis.
Okay, here you go, Ms. Higgs. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's true that just because you're smart doesn't mean that you cannot be mentally ill, but I think intellect is something that is very much an issue in this case. It may not be for the defense. It is for the prosecution. The experts have talked about that, have taken that into account, so it is relevant. The defendant's performance at school is relevant. That was the focus of parts of the opening statements for both sides. Both sides talked about the defendant's performance in school, how well he did, how he communicated, how he acted, his behavior, his interactions with people, whether there were any changes in those aspects of his life as time went on in school between August of 2011 and June of 2012. Those are all things that both sides have talked about in opening statements, and so this is very much relevant. It goes to the issue of the defendant's mental state. The prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the culpable mental state element of each offense. Additionally, the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was not insane at the time of the commission of the acts. So it is admissible under 401 and 402. It is not inadmissible under 403 because I don't see what prejudice there is. There is no prejudicial effect here. I think lay people understand that scientists do lab work, and they understand that they cannot experiment on human beings, and that they have to do lab work on animals, only certain types of animals. So I don't know what prejudice there is. The jury has already heard from both sides, the defense and the prosecution, about how smart the defendant is. Ms. Brady emphasized that yesterday in her cross-examination of the professor who testified yesterday from CU about how smart he was and the great grades he got in high school. In college, excuse me. So undergraduate. This doesn't have any prejudice. There's no prejudice that I see. There's no risk of prejudice, and certainly the probative value of the evidence is not substantially outweighed by the danger for unfair prejudice. In terms of the hearsay objection, it is not being admitted for the truth of the matter asserted. This is not being admitted to prove the scientific concepts discussed in the slides or in the PowerPoint presentation in general. It is being admitted to show the defendant's mental state and the defendant's intellect and the defendant's ability to reason at the time of his schooling. It is not being introduced for purposes of showing the truth of the matter asserted, so it is not hearsay. These are also statements that the defendant made, if you will. In terms of expert testimony, this is not being offered as expert testimony. It is not being presented to the jury as testimony that they have to consider for its truth, or as information they have to consider for its truth. It is being introduced to the jury, again, for the purposes of showing things related to the defendant's mental state and things related to the defense of insanity. So for all those reasons, the objections under Rule 401, Rule 402, Rule 403, the hearsay rules, 800 series, Rule 702, the expert witness rule, all those objections are overruled. And then the objections with respect to the specific slides, those are the slides that are numbers 3, 4, 8, 10, 18, and 23. The objections with respect to the slides are overruled too. I'm assuming that those objections go under 401, 402, and 403. And again, I don't see any prejudice. There are some pictures in those slides, but again, I don't see anything that is going to evoke any strong reaction by the jury, emotional or otherwise. I don't think it'll be a surprise to the jury or to anyone that somebody who is in school for a science-related degree is doing lab work that includes animals and experiments on animals. And there's nothing in these pictures that's gory or that's graphic. So for all those reasons, I find that the probative value of the slides is not substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. All right, let's bring the jury in, please. Please be seated, everyone. Good morning, folks. How's everybody doing? Good, good. The record should reflect that the jury's back in the courtroom. I'm glad to have you back. The prosecution may call its next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Achim Klug.
Good morning. Good morning. Could I have you raise your right hand for me so that I can administer an oath? Do you solemnly swear or affirm in a penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names?
Yes. Okay, my full name is Achim Klug. The first name is spelled A-C-H-I-M. The last name K-L-U-G.
I'm going to ask that you bring the microphone closer to your mouth
Okay.
because you're soft-spoken, and I want to make sure all the jurors can hear you, okay?
Okay, yeah.
All right, that's
Is this
better?
better?
Yeah, that is
Okay.
better. Thank you. If you could keep it there, that would be great. All right, Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, would you tell us what you do for a living?
Yes, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Anschutz campus, and my main job is research.
Research in what area?
We work in the auditory system, so basically the hearing system, the brain that computes the sound information that comes in through the ears and tells us what we're hearing.
What role do you play in the neuroscience program at CU?
I'm a member in the neuroscience program, and I mentor students if some choose to rotate with me or join my lab. And I also teach courses in the program.
Now, you have a PhD.
Yes, I do.
Now, should I call you professor or doctor?
It doesn't matter.
That's what the other guy said, too. So, look, the path to get to become a PhD assistant, is it assistant or associate?
Assistant.
Assistant professor in the neuroscience program. What did you have to do to get there?
Well, I got a PhD myself, so I was a graduate student once upon a time. Then there is what they call postdoctoral training is required in one or two positions. So after you graduate with a PhD, you go to some other institution, some other lab, and do research under the mentorship of some more senior faculty member. And after you've done this once or twice, then you apply for positions. And I happened to get this one here, and then I moved here. After arriving here, there is a membership process before one can become a member in the neuroscience program. So I had to submit a CV, and there was a committee who looked at the credentials and said yes or no, and then there was a presentation included, like a lecture, and after that the existing program members voted on my membership.
Just to clarify one of the terms used, you submitted a CV, and for those that don't know.
Yeah, a curriculum vitae. It's basically my education, my background, publications, everything I have done that is of relevance.
Like a giant resume, sort of.
Yeah, yeah.
And you said you got here to CU. How long ago was that?
It was 2009.
And have you been here ever since,
And
2009?
I've been here ever since, yeah.
Where'd you come from?
So before that, I was in Munich, Germany at the university there in a position that was halfway between faculty and postdoc.
So neither Minnesota nor Texas.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. You got here in 2009. Prior to that, did you serve as a PI for any other labs prior to coming to CU?
Possible exception in Munich, so it was this half position. So I mentored two students, but technically or legally there was a professor above me whose signature was on their graduations.
And to be clear, I use the term PI, not
Yeah.
like Magnum PI, but
Yeah.
what does it stand for?
Principal investigator.
Okay, and that means you're in charge of the lab.
Exactly, that means the person who is in charge, yeah.
Since your time at CU in 2009, have you been a principal investigator of a lab?
Yes, I have.
Over that period of time, have you had the opportunity to have entry-level graduate students in the PhD program work in your lab?
Yes, I've had several.
All right, and as part of your duties, do you also participate in interviewing potential incoming graduate students?
Yes, I do.
How long have you been doing that?
So on and off pretty much every year since I've gotten here. So there are always, it seems, a couple of interviews you do every year.
So to bring us up to where I want to go, you had the opportunity to interview the defendant back in February of 2011, fair?
Yes, that's
And then you also were his principal investigator for the lab he had for his first lab rotation between August and November of 2011?
maybe more like July and November
Okay.
2011. But yeah, and in that case, I would use the word mentor more than principal investigator.
Okay, and we'll get to that. So
Yeah.
let's back up and get to February of 2011. Were you serving as someone who interviewed potential candidates for this PhD program in neuroscience?
Yes, I was.
As part of that, did you have the opportunity to interview the defendant?
Yes, I did.
And before we go any farther, take a look at him. Does he look the same way he did back when you interviewed him?
Well, it looks like he gained some weight, but other than that, he looks, yeah, I recognize him.
Okay.
Yeah.
In February of 2011, how long did you interview the defendant?
30 minutes.
And when you interviewed him, did you make any impressions of him?
So yes. So after the interview, we're required to send in a review of the interview, and so I did do that. So I filled out the form, and so my impression was something in the middle.
What does that mean? Tell us what that means.
Okay, so basically, I think the official word we used is alternate. So our program, the online system where we evaluate applicants, has accept immediately, alternate, accept maybe, and reject. And so I put him in the alternate category, and that was based on a combination of various things. So like I had seen the written portfolio before the interview, had read it, and that was very good. In fact, really good. And then, but the impression I had in the interview was mostly he wasn't all that interested in our program.
Why do you say that?
Well, his answers are very short, were very short, even those giveaway questions, like sometimes you ask students a question like, what have you done before? If they've done a research project, what was that? Tell me about that research project. And most students go on and on and on, if for no other reason that as long as they talk, I can't ask another question.
Right.
And so, and all his answers were really brief and kind of, sounded like disinterested. I don't care what you ask me. And
What other words have you used to describe that initial set of impressions you made of the defendant in that interview? Do you remember? You remember using the term arrogant?
I don't think cocky, maybe. Was it
Cocky?
cocky? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You drew some conclusions about why you thought he was that way, and you conveyed those to Sukumar,
In that online form.
Dr.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about, Suk.
Yeah.
What were those?
So my impression was that since students apply to many programs at the same time, that he probably had been interviewed the week before by some other institution, and they made him an offer, and he decided he would go there. And so he really didn't care about what would happen here.
And that's how his presentation affected
That's
you?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so did you go and talk to Suk about your thoughts in addition to shooting them off in this online system?
Several weeks later, at the time, on interview day, I didn't. I just hit send, and that was the end of the story, because I thought I wouldn't see him again, based on my impression. But then a few weeks later, he emailed me and asked if he could rotate in my lab, and that's when I talked to Suk.
And so the defendant emailed you and asked if he could be part of your lab?
Yes, yeah.
Was he asking to start in August, which is the normal start of the school year, or before then?
What he asked in the email, I don't remember, but he did start before then, in June. So there are basically two possibilities that students have. Like at the latest, they need to be there by the start of the semester in August. But if they feel they would like to get a head start, they may start in June or June, July. And so that's what the defendant decided to do.
Now, without getting into the details of the conversations you had with Suk, you came away from that meeting thinking you would give the defendant a try?
Yes, correct.
All right, and so when did he start? Right in June? Do you know the day?
It could have been June 1st or July 1st. It was the first of the month, I remember that.
And starting in July 1st, then, what sort of things would you have the defendant do in your lab?
So initially he would just shadow the people who work there to see what we're doing and get an idea of where his interests may be and where his skills may be. And then over a couple of weeks or over several weeks, we develop a project where I or other people in the lab make suggestions on what a small research project for him could be, something that fits into 10 weeks or so and is meaningful and doable. And sometimes the student comes up with his own idea, and sometimes mentors help with that. And then they would work on that project less and less dependent on input as time goes on.
Now, when I hear the term lab, I'm picturing a bunch of dudes running around in white lab coats, you know, with the Frankenstein electricity thing shooting around. Let's find out what your lab does. First off, what building is it in at the campus?
So it's Research Complex 1 North on the 7th floor.
And how many people are in your lab?
At this point, we have 3 full-time employees and a couple more that are here for the summer or on volunteer basis. At that time, I think it probably was also 3 to 4 paid employees.
How do those people get paid?
They get paid from my research grants. So I have to apply for funding typically to the NIH, and it's a competitive process. And then when you get funding, then the university gets the money and I can decide what to do with it. And then I can decide to hire people or buy equipment or do whatever with it.
So you got to be
in
pretty
the scope
choosy.
of the research. Yes, of course. It's extremely difficult to get funding these days.
Okay. So tell us, you had mentioned before you work with auditory systems. The lab as it was in 2011 when the defendant was there, tell us what you were doing by the way, in terms that I can understand, what you were doing and how you were going about doing it.
So the big question is how to find out how the brain processes information, and it more specifically is when people go to a Friday night bar or a cafeteria at noon, you're trying to have a conversation with somebody while there are all these background noises. And so we're trying to study the circuit that allows people to do that. How can you understand a speaker you're interested in while there are all sorts of distracting noises? And so we do this partially with human volunteers who are in sound booths and localized sound, but there is also a component of animal experiments that we do. And that's done in Mongolian gerbils, like a rodent that has a similar hearing spectrum to humans.
And so some of what you do is to work with these gerbils?
Yes, correct, yeah.
Okay. And was that what the defendant was assigned to do beginning in either June or July whenever he started?
Yes, he would have been shown pretty quickly how to do rodent work. And so that the way this works is that initially somebody shows him how to do it, then he does supervised experiments, and then eventually when we're confident he can do it, he would do his own.
And did the defendant progress to that point where
Yes,
he was able to do it?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
Okay. Now, give us a sense, if you would, of the type of initiative and motivation that is needed to be successful in a lab like yours.
Not just mine, any lab. So it's an extremely competitive field. So at the minimum, students have to work a lot of hours. 40 is like, I would say, the absolute lower bottom that somebody is expected to work. You constantly have to read the newest literature. You have to be not only smart but also motivated that this is really what you want to do, and you know, constantly think about the project and think about your work and try to come up with new ideas and new cures, if you will. So it's very involved.
Before I ask you your impressions of the defendant given that description, I want to ask you, did you also serve in the capacity as a lecturer or teacher of a class for the defendant during that period of time?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that.
So we call it the Systems Neuroscience course, or the course schedule title is NRSC 7610. And it's a class that meets 3 days a week for 2 hours, and it's a combination of lecture and the students have to read literature and we discuss the literature, and they have to give presentations on various topics.
Now that particular class, did it take place after the conclusion of the lab rotation that the defendant had with you?
It was afterwards, so that was from about January to about March of 2012.
And so you had the opportunity to observe the defendant in a classroom setting as well?
Yes, correct.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1201?
Yes.
Sir, I'm handing you what I've marked here as People's Exhibit 1201. Do you recognize what that exhibit is?
Oh, the midterm exam that the defendant wrote for this class?
Now, what's the first page of that exhibit?
It's an email, so the exams are turned in by email. You just email them to the 3 course directors of the course, which was myself and 2 others.
And their names are also
And they're
appearing
also
on
on there, yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What is the part attached to that email?
The part attached is, well, it just says exam attached, cheers, James Holmes. And then there would have been either a Word file or a PDF, I don't remember, with the actual exam.
Now, you had the opportunity to review the defendant's work product through these emailed submissions of midterms and other finals?
Yes, I have, yeah.
And is that one that you were able to review as well?
Yes, I have reviewed and graded at least parts of it, yes, yeah.
Now, before I ask you about his performance in that class grade-wise, I want to ask you about your observations of him as a student in class. Did you have any?
Yes, he was generally very quiet. It's a relatively small class of maybe 6 to 8 students, and so it's, yeah, difficult to hide from the lecturer, I guess. And so we constantly call on the people, and he was one of the students who would mostly only talk when he was asked a question.
Let's talk about that. When you did call on him, was he able to provide an answer?
Usually, yes, he was quite good in that class.
Was your perception, give us your sense of how smart he was.
He, in terms of raw intelligence or studying, he was very good. He was one of the best I've ever met and known. So he had virtually perfect grades before he came to us. And at least the grades I was involved in were very good also.
Now, did you ever have concerns about him not coming to class?
No, no.
About him not being prepared to answer questions asked in class?
No, no.
Always polite, always professional?
Yeah, and he turned in his assignments whenever, like never late, whenever they were asked.
In fact, as far as that academic review, you had the opportunity to provide a grade for that NRSC?
For that class, yes.
Yeah, tell us what grade you gave him.
So, am I allowed to say that grade, or is this FERPA protected?
Yes, you can.
I
say
am.
the
Okay, the grade was an A, a straight A.
Okay, that's a good grade.
Yes, yeah, that's, I mean, the system doesn't allow any A pluses, in fact, so this is as good as he gets.
All right. I'm going to move for the admission, Your Honor, of People's Exhibit 1201 into evidence.
Is there any objection to P-TR-1201?
Yes, sir. We would object under 401, 403 cumulative, as well as United States Constitution 56814, as well as the Colorado Constitution, Article 2, Sections 16, 20, and 25.
Can I see that, please?
This one?
Thank you.
Also object to hearsay.
Okay, here we go. All right, the objections are overruled. It is relevant under 401 and 402. The probative value of the evidence is not substantially outweighed by the concerns listed in Rule 403. It is not hearsay because it is not being offered for the truth of the contents of the document. And so for all those reasons, People's Exhibit P-TR-1201 is admitted and may be published.
Your Honor, may I publish 1201 using the Elmo?
Yes.
Sir, may I get that back from you? Here's what I'm going to ask you, Doctor, if I could. And that is, I can't understand much of what's going on in here, but can you give us sort of a thumbnail sketch of what this was seeking to do and why this was an A answer? Can you do that?
So in these are kind of global, broad questions, and we're asking students not to regurgitate something they have memorized, but to put pieces of information they have learned together and come up with a solution. So classic questions on these exams are, which experiment would you design to show something, or how would you cure this particular disease, or There's one, a Planet X question I've just seen. So there is a hypothetical organism from some foreign planet, and you need to study this organism and find out how the brain works in that organism. What sort of experiments would you hypothetically design to do that? So these are all thinking questions where you have to argue and reason and not just memorize and spit out what you have memorized. And so he did that usually very well, and which is why this was a good exam.
Despite that lengthy answer, I still haven't figured out the Elmo thing. Can you just give me a moment, sir, and I'll... Your Honor, with the court's permission, I don't think I'll publish it at this time. I know it'll be available for the jurors later. May I move on?
Yes, you may move on.
I'm going to hand that back up to you just to have it there.
And members of the jury, this is a good time for me to remind you that not all exhibits who are admitted may be published, but you'll have an opportunity to review the exhibits that are admitted into evidence when you're deliberating, okay? All right, thank you. Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, sir, we've talked about that academic performance piece and your estimate of him in that setting. I want to go back now to your lab and tell us about your estimation of his performance in your lab.
So I always felt that he is the performance is lacking effort. So the hours I would expect somebody to put in weren't there. So the defendant came kind of late, took a long lunch break, and left relatively early. And he could have worked harder. And I had the impression maybe he's not particularly interested in the work we do in our lab.
Does that kind of performance that you've described impact your lab directly, given this grant funding?
Well, if I hired him, yes, it would, because any position I give to somebody, I can't give to somebody else. And so if I hire somebody who works less hard than they should, then that position is taken, and I can't hire somebody else who might work harder. Yeah.
Did the defendant demonstrate to you significant initiative in your lab in terms of wanting to tackle the issues you confronted him with?
For the longest time, not really. He would kind of do what he was told, and he would, there's nothing unpolite or anything. He just didn't show any initiative. He would work to the letter, I guess.
Now, you said for the longest time. Did he ultimately demonstrate to you an ability to turn that on?
Towards the end, there was a burst of initiative just before the final presentation, so that would have been late October, early November 2011. And so the reason was the students have to give a PowerPoint presentation on their project and their results to their peers and the faculty at the end of the rotation. And if you don't have anything to say that looks bad for you, it also looks bad for me as the advisor. And so shortly, like a few weeks before the presentation was due, it was really not clear what it would be on. And that's when he kicked into higher gear and worked a lot harder and actually got a relatively good project together.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor, with what's been marked as People's 1231?
Yes.
Sir, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1231. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, that's a printout of the PowerPoint presentation that was given around November 2011.
Now, you say it's a printout, and you would have seen it up on a screen like the ones we have here.
Yeah.
Okay, now, and is this the presentation that you talked about where the defendant rallied and was able to put something together?
Yes, yeah, that's it. So there's some actual results, analysis, comparison to literature. It has a lot of the aspects that a presentation should have.
Okay, and is there anything about it that you can tell that has been changed or altered at all, or is that an accurate copy of the presentation?
I don't remember it in the last detail, but one thing, like this last page, the printout doesn't do the file justice. So if you project the actual file, you would see that there are a lot of pictures under each other, layers of pictures that you only see when you're in presentation mode.
I see.
So I don't see these. I know they were there, but I don't see them now.
Other than that, is it a fair representation of the work product that the defendant generated at the end of your lab?
I think so, yes, yeah.
Your Honor, I'm going to move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1231 into evidence.
Is there any additional objection, Ms. Higgs?
No, Your Honor.
All right, without any additional objection, based on my previous ruling, Exhibit P-TR-1231 is admitted and may be published.
Now, sir, you also have the opportunity to provide an end of the rotation evaluation of the students in your lab.
Yes.
And did you do that for the defendant?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's been marked as People's 1197?
Yes.
Sir, I'm handing you what's been marked as People's 1197. Have you seen that before?
Yes, that looks like my evaluation of the rotation.
Okay. Which is more comprehensive than just an evaluation of the presentation itself?
Yes, correct. So that covers the whole several weeks of work.
Now, we heard Suk describe the green, yellow, red scoring method for this yesterday. Is that what you used also?
Yes, yeah, I did.
Can you do us a favor, please? And by the way, does that fairly and accurately capture the information that you inputted back then?
I think it does, yeah, yeah.
Do us a favor, if you would tell us what areas, based on that, you expressed some, by the way, no reds, right? No,
There are no reds, no.
some greens.
A lot of greens and some yellows.
All right. Tell us about the yellows. What were the areas of concern that you had?
So the yellows, and that means intermediate score, the student devoted the appropriate time commitment to the rotation. That's a yellow. And the student used time effectively in the laboratory is also a yellow.
And that reflects what you described to us just moments ago.
That's what I just said, yeah.
All right. It's broken out by tab, yeah. Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's been marked as 1199, People's 11?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1199. Have you seen those before, sir?
Just a moment.
And I think we put tabs on them is the difference.
Okay. Okay, it looks like, except for the first page, which I'm not sure what it is, the rest is an email thread about us meeting and discussing the final presentation.
Can I take a look at that first page,
Yeah.
see if I screwed something up there?
See, it has a date of August. I'm not sure what that email is. There would have been months before.
Let me ask you about that.
Okay.
Just as to that first page, as we're laying the foundation for this, that appears to be an email from August of 2011? Is that yes?
Yes, it is.
And forgive me, sir.
August 16, sorry, August 16.
Would that have been the period of time just after that early period that the defendant had been working in your lab, but prior to the start of the formal rotation?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Does that appear to be an email that he sent to you seeking guidance on something to do with what he should do at the end of that period?
Oh, yes, that's it. So it says, is the presentation this Friday a post-rotation talk, or shall I present another paper? So I guess he is asking if this talk we just talked about would be on August, the Friday after August 16th, or if she should present something else. So I'm not
Your
sure
Honor,
what...
I'm going to interject an objection at this point as to testimony with regard to this exhibit that has not yet been introduced.
Well, sustain at this point.
Sir, going through what we just went through there, does that make sense? Do you recognize that now as an email that was sent to you from the defendant?
Yeah, it looks like it, yeah.
Okay, and does that jive with your memory about what took place back in August of 2011?
So I guess I have an idea what it was, what the presentation might have been about.
Okay. Take a look at the rest of the emails in there, would you?
Yeah, so the other emails are all from November, looks like about a week or 10 days leading up to the final presentation, and this is just communication about when do we meet to discuss the final presentation.
The emails at the back of that packet, what dates do those cover?
The very back, May 27 are the last ones.
Okay, those emails, and we've heard about the first page, do those accurately capture the email communications that you received and sent to the defendant?
I think so, yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1199 into evidence.
Do you have an objection, Ms. Hicks?
Yes, Your Honor, we'd object on
Well,
relevance.
hold on. Why don't you approach?
Okay.
All right, the objection is overruled, and so People's P-TR-1199 is admitted.
Your Honor, to the extent that I failed to do this earlier, I'd move for the admission of 1197 into evidence as well.
Any objection to 1197?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, without objection, P-TR-1197 is admitted.
So, sir, at the conclusion of that lab and the conclusion of the class that you helped lecture or teach, and when did that class end during the...
It was about March 2012.
Right. You, based on this exhibit that we've just had admitted into evidence, did you receive contact from the defendant again about working in your lab as part of his longer PhD program?
Yes, he did contact me in May 2012 again, and he asked if he could join my lab for thesis work.
And how did you respond to him?
I responded that I wanted to discuss this with him and asked him to meet to discuss.
It's more than that. You used different words. What were the words you used?
I said, "Thank you for your message. I appreciate your interest. I also have to admit that I do have some concerns. Can we talk about this? Have a great weekend."
What were the concerns you wanted to speak about with the defendant?
Well, simply that he didn't work very hard. So what I wanted to discuss is to, make it clear that I expect the full workload. I expect this many experiments. I expect this many results.
Did he ever hook back up with you to have that conversation and try to work into your lab?
No, he did not. So a day later, he emailed me back and said, "That's unfortunate, but I understand. There is another lab I'll be joining."
I have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
You mentioned before about academically how you thought the defendant was one of the brightest that you'd ever had.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of his performance in your lab, that other component, of all the people that you've had come through your lab, how do you rate his performance in your lab?
Somewhere in the lower half, not the lowest I've ever seen, but somewhere near the lower half.
Have you had people do worse than the defendant in your lab?
Yes.
Okay. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Getting the stairs. Nothing. I'm going to risk the Elmo. Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, cross-examination, Ms. Hayes.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Professor
Good
Klug.
morning.
I just want to clarify sort of one quick point with you. I believe you work in the Department of Physiology and Biology, is that right?
Physiology and biophysics.
Is that within the Department of Neuroscience or separate?
So neuroscience is a graduate program. That's not a department. Like the department is the entity that pays my salary, that my direct supervisor is the chair of that department. And neuroscience is a training program that goes across departments. So some faculty from my department are a member in this and some faculty from other departments. So the neuroscience program director is not my boss, to say it briefly.
So there's professors from a variety of different departments that all come together and teach or have students from the neuroscience program?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's back up to the admissions interviews, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, my understanding is that those were in February of 2011?
That's correct, yes.
And I know that you've talked about your interview of Mr. Holmes. Before you interviewed him, I believe you said, I think you called it a portfolio. You saw his written portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That would basically be his application to the...
That's the whole application package, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And my understanding is that you were able to review everything that he had presented to the school for his application.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
That included a copy of his undergraduate transcript, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
It included his, GRE score.
Correct, yes.
It included his recommendation letters,
Correct?
and it included information about his own research experience that he had prior to applying, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And I understand that you were particularly impressed that he had had research experience at the Salk Institute.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's an institute in San Diego, correct?
Diego, yeah.
Okay. You were also impressed because he had letters of recommendation from people in the field of neuroscience, kind of big-name people in the field of neuroscience.
Big name people and names I recognized, yeah, because they're remote colleagues of mine.
Overall, for you, he was very impressive when you reviewed this portfolio, right?
Based on paper, yes, he was very impressive.
Now, I mean, you also went through a PhD program, correct?
Yes, yeah.
And did the undergraduate work and the application process, and is that right?
Yes, correct.
And you have previously worked or interviewed applicants and sort of evaluated applicants for admission, is that right?
Yes, correct.
Now, things that you're looking for in this application are obviously good grades, correct?
Yes, correct.
High scores.
In the GRE, yes.
And Mr. Holmes had all of those things. Is that right?
He did, yeah.
And it's fair to say that in order to obtain good grades in undergraduate, one has to be fairly committed.
To undergraduate work, yes, yeah. Yeah.
And for Mr. Holmes, his undergraduate transcript, I think in your words, is virtually perfect undergraduate transcript.
Correct, yes, yeah.
And we are talking about from a university that you had a high regard for.
It was, yeah, what was it, Irvine, I think? University of California, Irvine, maybe?
Riverside?
Riverside, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, sometimes when you look at someone's grades, it depends on where they went to school and what weight you're going to give those grades.
Partially, yes. A little bit also, absolutely, yeah.
And for him, those grades for you were virtually perfect from a school of good reputation.
Yeah, and with virtually perfect, I mean the 4.0 GPA would be mathematically perfect. That means never anything else but an A. And, you know, and I think his was not quite like that, but it was very close to that, if I remember correctly.
Fair to say that one has to work pretty hard to achieve a GPA like that from a reputable university like University of Riverside.
Probably, yes, yeah, yeah.
Can't really be lazy and unmotivated.
Probably not, unless you're really smart and study easy, yeah.
Okay. The same with the GRE application, with his scores, also reflective of somebody that you're going to evaluate, obviously has worked hard and been committed to get a score like that.
The GRE is a little different, so, you know, depending on who would sit here, some people believe it's a test of raw intelligence and you can't really study for it, so generally I would say it's less true for the GRE.
Okay. But still somebody has to exhibit some sort of commitment and intelligence to be able to get a high score like that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I think that one of the ways that you put it was based on his application or portfolio that you felt Mr. Holmes could have gone to almost any school.
That's correct, yes, yeah.
When you spoke with him in his interview, that was a total of 30 minutes?
Yes.
And I understand that there were other professors and I think student representatives as well that would have done interviews during that period?
Yes, not at the exact same time, but on the same day, yes, yeah.
Each one is a one-on-one interview?
Exactly, yeah.
And they roll kind of back to back?
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you recall where your interview with Mr. Holmes was in that?
It was in my office in RC1 North.
Okay, I didn't make that clear. Where in the day?
Oh.
On the schedule?
I believe sometime in the morning.
Okay.
Before noon.
Your description of Mr. Holmes' sort of communication style with you in that interview is that his answers were very short, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
Mostly kind of one-word answers?
One word or a sentence, like as brief as they can be, yeah.
You also talked a little bit on direct that you've had students come in during that interview and just kind of want to tell you everything that they know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, naturally everybody wants to look as good as possible in these interviews because presumably they're interested in the position.
Okay. And for some people, they would come in, I imagine, and really want you to think that they're very smart.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people want to do, yeah.
And some people might come in and really sort of, I'm trying to find the words to put this correctly, but kind of like you have applicants that come in and are kind of like know-it-alls, assume that they already know everything.
I don't personally like these, but yes, occasionally you have somebody like that, yeah.
Right. So when you use the word cocky to describe Mr. Holmes, we are not talking about somebody who came in and was a know-it-all with you.
Oh, I see. No, not. No.
Okay. In fact, I think the reason you got that impression was because he was not very interactive with you. Is that fair to say?
The answers were short, yes, exactly, yeah.
He didn't communicate a whole lot.
Yeah, correct, yes.
Kind of more quiet or standoffish, maybe.
Define standoffish?
Maybe shy,
Oh,
introverted.
shy. Yeah, shy or uninterested. That was my interpretation at the time, like not interested in the interview or the outcome of the interview.
Okay. And so you had assumed that maybe he had already gotten in somewhere else and
Yes, yeah,
this interview wasn't necessary for him.
yeah.
Okay. Now, I also understand that you made a recommendation not to reject him, correct?
Yes, it was alternate. That was the intermediate.
So what you mean by that is that you hold them back as an alternate person in case you don't get enough people that accept your
Yeah.
offers of admission?
That's exactly what it is, because we can only make a certain number of offers immediately. I thought he shouldn't be in that group, but we should make an offer to somebody else, and then if we have slots, we could take a chance and take him.
And that was not because of his portfolio or his intelligence, but because you felt he probably already got in somewhere else and you don't want to waste a spot on somebody who's already going somewhere else.
That was one thought, but it was also a combination of the very strong portfolio and the very weak interview
Okay.
that got me to this intermediate grade, if you want to call it like this.
Now, ultimately, there were other people on that admission committee that obviously had a different perspective or interaction that you did.
Obviously, but I know nothing about that.
Right. Because he was clearly offered a position and came to your school. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So I want to now jump forward to the class that you talked about teaching, all right?
Yeah.
And I understand that you called that systems neuroscience?
Yes,
Okay. Is that also fundamentals of neurobiology?
exactly. The official title is Fundamentals of Neuroscience.
Okay. This is a required class for neuroscience graduate students, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And I want to kind of just talk a little bit about how that class is organized, all right? My understanding is that there's sort of a course director that oversees putting together that class,
Yes, yeah.
that would organize what professors come in and lecture or teach on various dates.
That's correct, yes.
You were not a course professor for that class, were you?
A course professor?
I mean, a course director?
I was one of the three, so there is a transition period which has just happened. So maybe it was the first year I was on and trying to learn the ropes before the existing directors could resign.
Okay, so there were three of you that
Correct, yes.
organized that course?
Yeah, yeah.
When you have three professors like that that have organized a course, is it fair to say that not every professor is at every class?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay. And do you attend that class when you are not lecturing or teaching that particular topic?
So I attend the classes, obviously the ones I'm lecturing, and then the ones for which I am responsible. So the course directors divided that class into three about equal parts. And so I attended the parts I was responsible for.
So kind of 1/3 of the classes?
Something like this, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now this particular class, can I get defense trial exhibit, I believe it's 8, which is sort of the chart of the classes. We're going to show you an exhibit that's already been introduced, just
Okay.
sort of put this into a time frame. And if we can call out the fundamentals of neurobiology course.
Yes, yeah.
And that's the title, the Systems Neuroscience, Fundamentals of
Yeah.
Neuroscience.
Correct, yes.
Same
It's
class.
the same thing, fundamentals and systems, yeah.
And so it really ran pretty much from December 12th through March 9th of 2012. Is that fair?
Yes, December was very low key, but yeah, that sounds correct.
I imagine low-key because we're right before the
Just
holiday.
before Christmas, yeah.
Okay. And if we can get rid of the call-out and sort of, if you look at that in context, it overlaps a little bit with the last core course. Is that right?
Yes, core 5, yeah.
Okay. But it would have started at least a couple weeks after you had him in your lab. Is that right?
Yes, there was a break of a couple of weeks at least, yeah.
Okay. We can take that down. When you were in class and Mr. Holmes was in class, he was there present every time that you actually attended the class, is that right?
I think so, yes, yeah.
Okay. And he was not a student that really asked questions in class, is that fair to say?
Yeah, he was definitely on the quiet side.
In fact, he rarely spoke at all unless called upon in class.
Most of the time, yes, yeah.
Okay. And sometimes it's fair to say he was so quiet you may not even notice him except for it's a very small class of 68 people, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Now, when you taught him in this class, I understand that Mr. Holmes did not really necessarily acknowledge you directly in the class.
What do you mean by that, acknowledge me?
Well, you had him in your lab, so you had already had some interaction with him, is that right?
Oh, I see. So you mean, yeah, but that would be inappropriate anyway. If I have, some stronger interaction with a student than with the other students, that would not be appropriate to execute that in a class where we're going to treat everybody equal.
Of course, of course. But he didn't sort of acknowledge you before class started or come talk to you after class was over or anything of that nature?
No, I think, yeah, when we crossed in the hallway or something, then yeah, hello, hi, or something like this. I'm sure that was the case.
And you've indicated that you thought, while it's not appropriate, as you're saying now, that it was somewhat strange that he didn't acknowledge you having had some prior contact with him.
Maybe, maybe not. So usually half the class is very quiet. Like that goes through the years. Like you ask a question and half the students look at the floor and hope you won't call on them. So therefore it wasn't, that outrageously odd or something.
So when some of the students sort of look down on the floor and hope you don't call on them, I imagine for some of them they maybe don't know the answer, or they don't want to be exposed that they don't know or haven't studied. For Mr. Holmes, my understanding is that if he was called upon, he was able to answer the question.
He was able to answer, yeah. So are other students, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. With regard to that class format, my understanding is that there are, it meets, I think, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, is that right?
Yes, correct.
For 2 hours each session?
Yes.
And part of the session would be a professor giving a lecture.
Mm-hmm. That's about half the course, I think.
Okay. Part of it is giving students reading materials, like articles and such to read.
Yeah, that's not happening in class time. So the syllabus is online and they know what they have to read. We don't need to talk about this in class. So the other half would be students presenting material.
Right, and that's exactly what I was going to get to. The syllabus is online, so they're able to see what, like attachments, what articles they're supposed to read, sort of their homework.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and so then part of the class, though, is devoted to students coming in, and each time, isn't a different student required to sort of give a presentation on the paper?
Yes, maybe not exactly each time, but about 3, maybe it is each time, about 3 a week.
Okay. And that involves the student reviewing the materials and then coming in and speaking about it?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's just sort of describing or explaining the information in the article, is that right?
Yes, teaching to the other students what they read, basically.
Were you in class when Mr. Holmes gave a presentation in that particular course?
I'm sure I was, but I remember very little about it.
You don't recall?
Yeah, I don't recall.
Is it fair to say that in your experience with Mr. Holmes in that class, that as far as Well, let me talk, perhaps we can get at it this way. Let's talk about the midterm examination in that class, okay? My understanding is that you did not score the entire exam, is that right, just parts?
That's correct, yes, yeah.
But that's something that's not actually performed in class, it's like a take-home.
Yes, it's a take-home exam, and they have several days to answer the questions and email the answer back.
Okay. And they're given, I'm assuming, information to read and then the question, and they have to extrapolate from that and write a response.
And it's open book, so they could go to the library and go to any book they can think of.
So tell me if this is fair, that with Mr. Holmes, your experience with Mr. Holmes' ability to read and understand sort of materials on his own and present that information in written format, he was very, very good at that.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Part of his grade in that class would have also depended on his presentation of the paper that he was assigned to present.
Yes, that's correct. So if it had been really terrible, he would not have gotten an A, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was also able to sort of read materials and then come back and explain those materials in a small environment
Yes, correct, yeah.
with a few students. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Let's now back up and talk about that lab rotation, all right? Can we put defense D-TR 8 back up again, please? So now on this exhibit, it indicates that lab rotation number 1 is your lab rotation with Mr.
Yes,
Holmes,
yeah.
right? And it indicates August 2011 to November 2011. And those would be the normal time for a neuroscience student that didn't start early, right, to do his first lab rotation. Is that fair?
Yes, August would be the normal time, the start of the semester, yeah.
Okay. And you indicated that Mr. Holmes decided to come early. Is that a yes?
Yes, that is a yes.
Thank you. So he came, I think you said either June or July 1st. You weren't sure which one.
Yeah.
So that would have been a little bit before what's indicated
Correct,
on
yes.
this.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, also what's indicated here is that you had some other, I put RA for research assistant. I'm not sure, because I've seen different titles for these people.
Yeah, so these are not their official titles, but yes, these people were in the lab working with him.
Okay, so one of those is, and lovely, we're going to call this out so the jury can see it a little bit better. Anna Donzio, am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, correct, yeah.
Okay. And Otto Albrecht.
Also correct.
And they had full-time positions, paid positions in your lab?
Yes.
Okay. So they were beyond their first year and were permanently in your lab?
Yes, so Anna in fact has a PhD. She's a postdoc, and Otto at the time didn't have a PhD. He was a graduate student.
Okay. Are they both still working in your lab now?
Yes.
Okay. And then also indicated on this is the presentation date of November 21st of 2011. Is that about the time that you recall Mr. Holmes giving his presentation?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Okay. Before we talk about the presentation, let's talk about Mr. Holmes in the lab. And my understanding is that even while he was in the lab, you were able to tell that he was quite smart?
Yes, yeah.
Were you in the lab every day?
At some point, yes. So my office is on the same floor, some doors away, and so I would say at least once or twice a day for some reason I'm in the lab for some time.
Okay. How much time is some time?
Anything between a few minutes to a couple hours to discuss something, do something.
But you're not necessarily in the lab 8 hours a day, every single day?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay. Anna Donzio would be working fairly independently, fair to say?
Yeah, yeah.
Same with Mr. Albrecht?
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And at a certain point, Mr. Holmes is also working independently after that initial period, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So you aren't there sort of, like as I imagine a teacher being there saying, no, you need to do this, no, you need to do that. That's not what was happening.
No, that's only at the very early phases where they don't know anything, and then you try to teach them the technique, and then the way it works is we meet typically like at least once a week where we have one-on-one meetings with all the people who work for me, where we say what happened last week, what's supposed to happen this week, what are you doing? And
You actually have keyed in right on where I was going.
Okay.
So in the lab itself, then there's sort of a weekly lab meeting, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And also in that lab meeting, students in your lab or people in your lab may present the work that they've been doing and talk
Correct.
about it?
Yes, yeah.
Could they also present maybe a paper that was relevant to your research?
Yes, they could present anything.
And where are the prosecution's exhibits? Do you have them, Mr.?
I have them.
Yes.
So when you were talking about this first email on August 16th of 2011, the top one, do you recall that? And it's indicating, is this a presentation this Friday, a post-rotation talk, shall I present another paper? This is not talking about that final presentation, correct?
So maybe not, like in hindsight, I'm not really sure what this email is.
Okay.
But I guess maybe it's alluding to our lab meeting presentations.
August 10th, I guess, or 16th of 2011 would be a little early for him to be preparing a post,
Yes, that would be early because it's only halfway through.
right, the research hasn't been completed. Okay. Do you recall that Mr. Holmes, with these lab meetings, it's just the few people in your lab, so it's a small meeting?
Actually, sometimes we have two other labs that work in auditory and vestibular fields, and so we all meet together, basically 3 PIs and about 10 people, I would say.
Okay. Is that every week or depending on who's
That's
available?
every other week, and in the weeks in between, it's just my group.
Okay. And do you recall if Mr. Holmes was able to present a paper that he was assigned during those lab meetings?
No, I don't recall.
Okay. While he was in your lab, is it fair to say that he didn't really speak very much? Is that fair to say?
To me, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
He didn't really come to you with questions frequently?
No,
Okay. Didn't give you a whole lot of feedback, is that fair?
that's fair also, yeah.
Okay. Just give me a moment. And I think that initially you said that you had concerns about him putting in the time. You weren't sure whether he was putting in enough time for the experiments, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
But now, when you did approach him later in the lab, in the time frame of that first lab rotation, and actually spoke with him about needing to create some results, he incorporated your suggestions and really got some good work done the last couple weeks.
Yes, yeah, yes, he did.
He was receptive to your criticism, is that fair?
Yeah, he was.
He wouldn't react like angrily, like you can't
Oh,
criticize
no,
me?
never,
Okay. For the most part, actually, I think for the entirety of his lab, it's fair to say that he always presented in a professional manner.
Yes and no. So his presentations were scientifically well done and made sense, but then the word professional, where you could say maybe not, there were like cartoons in there that didn't belong there, and unrelated cartoons and unrelated jokes to the topic, unrelated to the topic.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm going to get to that in a second. What I was trying to clarify is that on a personal or interpersonal relations with other people in the lab, is it fair to say that he, while quiet and didn't communicate a lot, he was nice, he was not mean to anybody? Is
No,
that fair?
never. He was nice, communicated professionally, not angry, if that's what you mean. Yeah.
That's what I'm getting
Yeah.
at. Okay, thank you. I will follow up with you on the jokes, though, because I understand where you're going with that. Well, why don't we go there right now? This exhibit that you reviewed from the prosecution, it's People's Exhibit 1231, the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah.
You had indicated that the last slide didn't really accurately show what the presentation was. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Can we pull up the last slide of the actual PowerPoint, please? this is just a paper,
Hold on a second. Has it been admitted?
no, not yet.
Okay, then you can't.
Well, I would like to pull it up for just the witness, if that's possible. Because we can't put it in paper because it's a presentation.
All right, any objection?
Oh, no, sir.
All right, go ahead.
So I'm going to have that played for you to review it, but before we do that, this is just a paper representation of an actual presentation done.
Exactly. yeah.
Okay. And so when you do a PowerPoint presentation, there may be different layers of the slide that don't actually get printed on paper, right?
Exactly. I could put several pictures on top of each other that only come up when I push the button. But in
Right.
the printout, it's only one page, so it's all on top of each other.
You attach like animations to the
You
pictures
could do
so
that
they
also, yeah.
come in on top of each other. Okay. Now, can we play that for this gentleman, please?
So it's just here.
Is it working?
No.
It's gray.
Is it not working? Are we having technical difficulties? Is there anything on the screen?
No, but
Now here it is,
it
here it
is.
is, yeah. Yeah, so that's the slide I was talking about, yeah.
Okay. And is that slide, the way it's being played to you, a fair and accurate representation of the slide that Mr. Holmes had at the end of his
Yes,
presentation?
yeah.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd ask, because it's an actual presentation, we can put it on disc and give it to the court at some later point, but we didn't have time to do that given the notice of this presentation. I'd ask to admit it and publish it to the jury at this point.
Is it marked?
So I don't have a tangible item to mark, but we can designate it, Defense Trial Exhibit 9.
Are you intending to designate only the 3 or 4 slides that showed up?
It's just the very last slide of the presentation, and I'm sorry, had I thought about it, I would have printed out each layer of the slide, and I did not, but I can do that.
So it's one slide, but what showed up were 3 or 4 different
There were 4
screens.
photos on top.
So you're introducing or moving to introduce all 4 photos, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is there any objection?
No, sir.
All right, without objection, that will be admitted once it's been marked as a disc. And it'll be Defense Exhibit 9, so D-TR-9.
Thank you. Can we publish that to the jury at this point?
Any objection?
No, sir.
Go ahead.
So if we can back it up and start it at the beginning.
It went kind of fast when it was played for the witness and for me, so I don't know if there's a way to slow it down.
Well, we will do our best. Thank you, Your Honor. And Dr. Klug, while that's coming up, clearly you were present and watched this final presentation, is that right? Okay. I ask for your patience. We are trying. We briefly saw that slide, Professor Klug. I'm going to go back and forth between professor and doctor because I just don't know which one to use. But there was a word at the top of the slide, verhorens. Do you know what that word means?
Well, I think it pretends to be a German word, but it doesn't really exist in German language, but
Okay. And you speak German, yes?
yes, yeah.
Do you know what the meaning is it's pretending to be?
So hören means to listen or to hear, and ver is kind of something you put in front of the word. Verhören means I misheard, I didn't understand correctly, but the way it's used here is definitely not correct.
Okay. Did you have an idea when the presentation was given of how it was being used?
Yeah, I thought I knew it was, or maybe I didn't. I thought, because I'm a German native speaker, he put this in there for me,
Okay.
trying to, I don't know, impress me or something.
Okay. Can we play the first animation, please? So, can you see that on your screen? It's a little bit harder for the jury. If you could tell us what that says.
So it says, Jimmy, answer me, please.
Okay. So this is sort of one of the jokes or the cartoons that you were referring to before, right?
Exactly.
And for a neuroscience student to put these into their presentation, you said was really not appropriate. Is that fair?
Well, this one. So I have no problems with putting jokes and funny things into a presentation, but it would need to be related to the presentation. Like this is a chicken and an egg. Like the presentation wasn't about chickens or eggs or cooking. It was about the auditory system of rodents. So where does this belong here? That was basically my point.
It didn't really apply to the context.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you there when this slide was presented?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And my understanding is that kind of these types of unrelated, inappropriate, I mean, not inappropriate off jokes, but not appropriate for this context jokes kind of made people feel a little uncomfortable. Is that fair to say? Awkward?
Well, yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
Okay. And his presentation of it kind of was awkward. Is that fair to say?
The presentation of those jokes, I don't recall.
Okay.
So the overall presentation was not, maybe a little awkward, but not bad.
Okay. Can we play the next animation? Okay. So this one, it reflects that's a good question. Let me mull it over. Also, really not related to this presentation whatsoever at all. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Awkward to have in this presentation. Fair?
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you recall that when people were watching this, you know that feeling you get when somebody thinks they're doing something funny, but it's not really landing as funny and you're kind of embarrassed for that presenter?
I might have had some of that feeling, especially since it was my student.
Right.
Yeah.
But Mr. Holmes did not pick up on that and sort of stop going through these slides, right? He went through each of these
But
animations.
going to the end, yeah, I don't remember what his response was.
And then if I think there's I think there was another joke, is that fair to say? And that's kind of how he ended this presentation. Okay. If we can take that down. So as far as Mr. Holmes' behavior in your lab, that was really the only area that you describe as at all being unprofessional.
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, despite that, I want to talk about your evaluation of Mr. Holmes, which was in prosecution trial exhibit 1197. And I am going to return these to you, Your Honor, if I may approach.
Yes.
Now, Professor Kluge, there are a number of categories listed throughout this evaluation, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And I just want to review with you that information. Other than the 2 yellow marks that you've already discussed, the rest of the marks that you gave him were in the green category, correct?
Correct.
And the green category is the higher category, correct?
Yes.
And I think that you indicated he got a green or a number 1 in his understanding of the project. You felt he understood it, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That you also gave him a green mark in that he demonstrated commitment and enthusiasm for the project. Number 7.
Did. So that was maybe a little generous, but I did, yes.
Okay. You also gave him a number 1 on item 12 that he included the correct controls. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's in how the experiment is
That's
done?
the experimental design that refers to, yeah.
So he was able to grasp the concept of the experiment and execute it?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
You also gave him a 1 on generating interpretable data, correct?
Yes.
You gave him a 1 on his ability to design and interpret experiments?
Yes, in fact, he had a lot of influence on his project, the one that we have just seen that he presented.
So when you said on direct examination that some students really, it all comes from the lab PI, Mr. Holmes was able to really be involved in the creation of his project within your lab?
Yes, he was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that would have happened in the earlier weeks?
In the weeks leading up to the project, so I think about maybe a month before that final presentation, there was no idea that any one of us had what the presentation would be, and then it was developed during that month.
And he was able to participate in
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Okay.
substantially.
And you also gave him a 1 on his maintenance of lab notebook and write-ups of experiments?
Yeah.
So I think that means that he was able to document well what was going on?
Yeah, he documented it. We have the data. I'm sure you have seen it too.
You, I may have seen it, but I would not have understood it. With regard to his performance in the rotation or lab meeting presentation, he also gave him a 1, or a green.
Yes, yeah.
That would have been with regard to those lab meetings that
Those
you're having?
weekly meetings, yeah, because he was there and because he presented, although I don't remember it.
Okay, but clearly you gave him a 1, so he obviously would have been able to present to you the information you
Yes,
gave him to
yeah,
read.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a few other areas I'm going to get into. I just want to also sort of go back to this point. I think that you have indicated that Mr. Holmes, really compared to the other students in your class or in your lab, was very quiet, right?
Yeah.
He kept to himself more than the other students in the class.
I'm always talking about the interactions with me. So what happens in the lab when I'm not there, I have no idea, obviously.
So fair to say the other students in your lab interacted with you more?
Yes, yeah,
He kept to himself more with regard to you?
correct, yes, yeah,
Okay. And he didn't volunteer much information about himself, correct?
correct.
And certainly all of the conversations that you had with Mr. Holmes were related directly to the lab, correct?
Yes,
You didn't talk to him about personal issues or anything on that nature?
I don't ever remember having done that.
Okay. And the entire time that he was in the lab, or even when you saw him in class, you would never describe him as an attention seeker. Is that fair to say?
No.
You would not.
But okay, define intention seeker.
Attention seeker,
Oh,
somebody.
attention, yes, no, definitely not.
Okay. Just to follow up on the last few items on that final evaluation, you also gave him a 1 or a green in that he responded positively to feedback.
Yes, that's correct.
And we've talked about this, exhibited professional behavior. He gets a green mark.
Yes,
Okay. He actively incorporated suggestions after feedback, green.
correct,
Okay.
yeah.
And ultimately, he was able to present his experimental results, correct?
Correct.
Got a green. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then finally, I think the last category is you would take the student into your lab for a thesis project. We got a green.
Exactly, yeah.
So that leads me to sort of the last category of information, and if I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. And this is simply, when you do this assessment, this is an assessment that
Yeah.
Mr. Holmes would be made aware of, right?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you actually sit down and go through this with him?
I don't think so.
Okay.
He receives an email copy. As soon as I hit submit, he gets an email copy of that.
Okay. I think out of all of these categories, and there are 18, he got a 1 or a green in 16 of the 18, correct?
Correct, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And ultimately, as you've indicated, you said that you would take him in your lab at that point in time. That was your evaluation, right?
Yes,
So when he contacted you later in the spring, I believe it was in May, that would be the time that the neuroscience graduate students are looking for a permanent lab placement
correct, yes, yeah.
for their second, third years, right?
Yeah.
Okay. At that point in time, you indicated that you had some concerns that you wanted to discuss with him.
Yes.
Okay, so you did not immediately say that you would accept him into your lab?
Well, the email I thought was encouraging. Thanks for your interest. I'm honored, or something like this. But we need to discuss these things, which were precisely the 2 yellow items on that evaluation.
Right. And his response was, I think it was all, like
Something like, that's
AW.
too bad. I'll be joining another lab.
Right. And so at that point, after that, you did not have any further communication with Mr. Holmes, is that right?
I didn't.
Okay. If I can just have a moment?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Any redirect, Mr. Brockler?
Your Honor, thank you. Sir, a few things I want to talk to you about. One, the pictures of the mouse and the mullet. Remember that?
No.
Let me take
can
the
you
approach
clarify?
here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm blocking you, sorry.
You're back to the witness. Thank you. All right, go ahead, Mr. Brockler.
Do you remember that the 2 different pictures, one had the mouse talking to the egg, the other one was
Oh, the chicken, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, the chicken, yeah, yeah.
Okay, yes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
confused by the mullet. Was it your sense from reviewing that and having watched the presentation live that the defendant, that was a reflection that the defendant didn't understand or grasp the concepts, or that he didn't grasp or understand humor in that setting?
When you say he didn't understand the concepts, you mean the scientific
Yes, sir.
concepts? Oh, he definitely understood those. He didn't understand the humor.
Just fell flat.
Yeah, yeah.
To confirm something that Ms. Higgs finished up with, the last communication you had with the defendant about joining your lab was to express concerns about his request in joining your lab?
Yes.
Is that fair?
Well, to ask him to meet, to discuss. So,
In his responsive email, did you interpret that as, that's too bad that you have those concerns, I've moved on to another lab?
yeah, yeah.
His presentation, we talked a lot with Ms. Higgs about how he appeared in the interview, and you got to see him through the class, all the way through really almost the end of March. Was he that same guy that you met back in February of 2011? Same presentation, same affect, same way of answering questions?
I would say so, yeah.
You detected no big shifts or changes one way or the other?
No, I didn't.
And there was something Miss Higgs asked you about his stellar credentials coming out of undergrad. And the question related to, wouldn't it take a great deal of effort and work to get those great grades in undergrad? And you gave a response that yes, unless you're smart and you study easy. And then there was no follow-up. I want to follow up with you. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the undergraduate world, you go to classes, you memorize what you're taught, you read the assignments you're given, and then there is a test where you prove that you have memorized all that. And so this is one type of learning, but this is pretty much what the entire undergraduate career consists out of. So if you're good at that, that means you're really good at memorizing things and spitting them out again and writing them down in the exam. And so if you happen to be a person, so yeah, you either study hard to remember every last detail from your class, or you're studying smartly, that you somehow have a good feeling for what the teacher will ask and you focus just on that, or you just have a great memory and you read something and it's in your brain.
So doesn't having great grades, great letters of recommendation, a great GRE score, doesn't that all guarantee that you're going to be a successful scientist?
Unfortunately, it doesn't, no, because it helps. Like if you don't have those things, then it looks bad, but if you do have them, it's still not a guarantee, because we're looking for a very different skill set in graduate school.
Including what?
Including self-motivation. There is nobody who tells you you need to read these pages by tomorrow and there will be an exam on it. There are basically never exams in graduate school. You need to be self-motivated, decide what you're interested in, come into the lab and work hard, although there is no immediate consequence such as an F or a missed exam. Nobody takes attendance. You just have to come and work on your own pace. And yeah.
Was it your impression then, having dealt with the defendant in an academic and in a laboratory setting, that he was lacking some of those needed skills to be a successful scientist?
Yes, that's what I thought. That's where he may be lacking.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any recross, Ms. Higgs?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Let's, I have a question. You may have said this, sir, and I may have missed it, but what was the date of your evaluation of the rotation?
It would have been, this doesn't have a date on it, so it would have been a day after November 21st. So, yeah,
Of 2011.
of 2011, yeah.
All right.
Immediately after that final presentation.
And what was the date of the midterm exam? The take home?
Yes, I would say sometime mid-February 2012.
Okay, thank you. All right, it looks like the jury has some questions, so if you would give us a moment, please. Thank you. Would counsel please approach? All right, Professor, the jury has submitted some questions that they would like me to ask you, and based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, I have concluded that some of these questions are appropriate, and so I am going to ask them now. The first question is, throughout your time interacting with the defendant, did he ever seem disconnected with reality?
The answer is clearly no.
The next question is, as it pertains to academics specifically, did the defendant come off as lazy or unmotivated as he did in labs? Did he succeed based on effort, intelligence, or both academically? So that's sort of a two-part question, and if you need me to repeat it, I can. I need to caution you that you should answer these questions only if you know, and that you should not speculate. You should answer if you know, based on what you know, not on what you've heard.
I could only speculate. I don't know the answer to that question.
To either one of those parts.
I'll
repeat it again. I'll repeat it again. The first part is, as it pertains to academics specifically, did the defendant come off as lazy or unmotivated as he did in labs?
Academics in general, meaning classes, I would say no. No, he came up as quiet but competent and hardworking, I guess.
The next part of the question was, did he succeed based on effort, intelligence, or both academically?
That I don't know. That I can only speculate.
Okay.
Because I don't know the undergraduate.
All right, and you're not allowed to speculate, so thank you.
Yeah.
All right, the next question is, are interns given guidelines for lab participation to include required hours expected to work, as well as general objectives / outcomes for the lab component? And if so, how is this communicated with interns and when?
Okay, so there are no set hours, and I specifically encourage the people, my students and the people who work for me, to come and go as they please. Like, all we care about are results. Like, at this state, you have to do a presentation and you have to have some results. And I guess it's part of the rotation to see how a student translates that goal into little steps. So that's a big part of graduate school. There is nobody there who micromanages you and tells you, today we do this, tomorrow we do that. But on October 21st, you have something to show, and it's up to you to schedule your time to achieve this goal.
The next question is, were most of the students in the graduate program older or younger than Mr. Holmes, the defendant, when he was there?
Oh, so from his incoming class, I don't know the exact ages. So my guess is from his incoming class, they were all about the same age within 1 or 2 years. But this was the incoming class, and if we were talking about all the students in the neuroscience program, including those who came 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years ago, they would be older because they came in earlier.
Did you have an impression that he was immature compared to the other students while he was in your lab?
Socially immature, yes. That was my impression the whole time.
And the next question, which is the last one for you, is, can some students get the same results in a lab with much less effort?
No. All the easy experiments have been done. Whatever you do, whatever lab you join, you will have to work hard.
Okay, any follow-up questions based on those questions from the people? Yes.
One question, Your Honor, if I could.
Okay, go ahead.
You were asked a question by the jurors about your perceptions of his effort and hard work in the academic setting. Do you recall that question?
Yeah.
My question to you is that assessment by you based upon work that you observed him put in, or based upon the fact that he was able to answer the questions in class and the written product he provided at midterm and in the final?
It's based on the results, because I have seen good grades and good midterms and such coming out of him, but I wouldn't know how many hours he spent writing these.
Thank you.
Or preparing.
Any follow-up questions, Ms. Higgs?
Just very quickly. We talked about your interactions with Mr. Holmes while he was in your lab, sort of that consisting of the meetings. I want to just clarify the extent of your interactions with Mr. Holmes after that lab, to follow up with the juror's question on,
You mean after the rotation was over?
yes,
Okay.
yes. And that basically consisted of the times that you saw him in the systems neuroscience class, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. You did not have any communication with him outside of that class, correct?
No, I didn't.
You didn't have any social interaction with him?
No.
Okay. And then the brief email interaction you had with him in May, correct?
That would be the exception, the one exception, yeah.
Okay. And again, that communication was just over email, it was nothing in person?
Not personal, just email.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. May this witness be released from his subpoena?
He may, Your Honor.
All right, is there any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, members of the jury, it's 20 till 11, and so let's go ahead and take our morning break at this time. Please keep all my admonitions in mind, but otherwise enjoy the break, okay? I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom. All right, I'll see you after the break in 20 minutes. Yep.
Briefly approach what matter I think the court would want to know about right away.
Sure.